We live in fortunate times. I will assume, since you are listening to this podcast, that you are not deep in the middle of a violent war zone. You are probably not on a creaky boat at sea, fleeing for your life from such a war zone, to a host country that may not greet you with open arms. You're probably not in a part of Africa subject to the murderous actions of a hostile religious extremist group bent on asserting their power. Most likely you live in a developed nation with a decent internet connection, access to podcasts, and more importantly, access to vital things we take for granted, like electricity, food, and water. But fortune is often overlooked. At this moment, tens of thousands of Canadians are fleeing from the city of Fort McMurray, Alberta, as massive flames engulf the area. They are homeless, praying that their vehicles have enough fuel to get them out of the danger of the fire. But it was only a few days ago that they were fortunate, just like you are, now.
This is the end, beautiful friend. This is the end.
Greetings, kittens. Welcome back to the Podcast of Doom, a podcast devoted to the study of epic failure. I appreciate your patience for hanging in there while I try to balance my hectic schedule. Today, thanks to the suggestion, research, and hard work of listener Ethan in Cincinnati, episode 26 of the podcast will cover a potential disaster in the making, the Mosul Dam in Iraq. The dam is not collapsed yet, but as we will learn, that is only through good fortune and not so much through careful planning and preparation. In episode 18, we discussed the Banquao Dam failure. That dam failure occurred in August 1975. It happened when a once-in-2,000-year storm dumped more than a meter of rain on a Chinese dam that was designed for a once-in-a-thousand-year storm. While the proximate cause of the disaster was too much water pressure against the dam, it was a string of human failings that allowed for so many people to die needlessly. As Madam Qian Zhenying, Minister of Water Resources and Electric Power, said in her address to a national conference on dam and reservoir safety, the failings were many. They included using dam designs not adapted to China's unique geography and climate, not learning from a dry run storm in 1972 that should have led to procedural changes during high water events, not having contingency plans in place for communication, electric power, and evacuation, and not having clear lines of authority to handle an emergency. Also, as we learned, not only did the dam have fewer than half the number of sluices required to let the drainage keep up with the inflow of water, but those sluices they did have were kept closed in an attempt to minimize the damage from flooding. This episode will examine another Banquao Dam in the making, the Mosul Dam in central Iraq. Going back 15 million years, during the Middle Miocene period, a geological formation called the Atop Formation formed beneath what is now the area of Mosul, Iraq. The Atop Formation is about 250 meters thick, or 820 feet, and is mostly composed of gypsum, a soft mineral commonly used as blackboard chalk, as well as anhydrite, limestone, sulfur, and other karstic rocks. We'll get to what karstic rocks are in a moment. During the 1980s, when Saddam Hussein was at war with his neighbor Iran, he was also in the middle of an Arabization plan to displace the Kurds who were hostile to his regime with more friendly Sunni Arabs. Just as in China during the Cultural Revolution, dams in Iraq were seen as a symbol of modernity, pride, and national power. In part to maintain support among the resettled Arabs and the population in general, his government drew up plans for a large dam on the upper Tigris River. This dam was intended to provide better access to water and electricity, as well as to help control flooding. A generation prior, heavy rains had caused a massive flood of the Tigris River that displaced more than 500,000 people. Devastated farmland all the way to Basra, cut off communications in Tikrit, threatened to inundate Baghdad, and eventually led to the shuffling of the Iraqi cabinet. How much this experience affected Saddam we don't know, but worries about the damage floods can wreak, economic, political, and social, are deeply woven into the fabric of life in a desert nation where most of the population lives stretch out along the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers and their tributaries. In 1981, Hussein ordered that a dam be built on a site 60 kilometers upriver from Mosul. They hired a German-Italian consortium led by Hochtief AG, the same company that built the Aswan Dam on the Nile River 20 years earlier. It would turn out to be Iraq's largest dam. The earthen embankments would be 3.4 kilometers long, 113 meters high, and 10 meters wide at the top. The dam would hold back Lake Dohak with a capacity of 11 billion cubic meters of water. That's about twice the volume of Louisiana's Lake Pontchartrain. The power station had a 1,052 megawatt capacity and would annually generate 3,420 gigawatt hours of electricity for northern Iraq. In a grand gesture to himself, the dictator named it Saddam Dam. It started filling in 1984 and generating electricity in 1986. Now, do you remember the Fatah foundation of gypsum and other chalky rocks? When exposed to water, these types of rocks will dissolve and form what's called a karstic layer that resembles a sponge more than a solid slab of rock. As the dam began to fill, the water pressed into the substrata, dissolving the rocks under the dam's foundations. And remember that the area is generally sulfur-rich? Well, the surface water that was seeping into the layers of gypsum is rich in oxygen, and when oxygen mixes with sulfide, it creates sulfuric acid. The sulfuric acid reacts with the gypsum to dissolve it even faster. As the gypsum dissolves, it creates gaps into which more water flows and more gypsum is dissolved. Eventually, it forms caverns and sinkholes, a highly unstable foundation for a large dam holding back a massive lake. To make matters worse, the dam is so long that the Fatah Formation's rocks composition under the western and eastern abutments is different, dropping off sharply under the western abutment and gently under the eastern one. These differences mean the hydraulic pressure on each abutment is different, and that also accelerates the dissolution of the substrata. Geologists knew about this situation when the dam was designed. Hochtief included a grout curtain in their initial design. The curtain was composed of a wall of impenetrable concrete extending well past the layers of gypsum into the bauxite below. However, in the interests of saving time and money, they scrapped this grout curtain and instead decided to play the civil engineer's equivalent of whack-a-mole. They would search for where underground caverns were forming and inject a slurry of concrete and other additives to fill them back up. An unidentified employee told Reuters, "Inside Hochtief, it was seen as the group's worst construction ever. Geologically, gypsum does not count as rock. It's sediment, as soft as butter. In physical terms, it's a viscous liquid. The whole soil is like Swiss cheese." And it was on this bedrock of Swiss cheese that the Mosul Dam was built. From the time the dam began to fill in 1984, a grouting program operated 24/7. When Iraq invaded Kuwait in 1990, the UN imposed sanctions on Iraq that prevented them from buying military equipment. One of the items banned was microfined cement, which can be used to build and repair military airstrips. But it is also the type of cement that was injected as grout beneath the dam. Iraqi engineers had to switch to an inferior quality concrete to continue the grouting. In 2003, the U.S. invaded Iraq. One of the U.S. military's main concerns was that Hussein would have his supporters blow up the dam and cause a massive flood. Kurdish forces raced into the area and secured the site, and the workers there maintained grouting operations throughout the chaos of the initial invasion and into the months and years beyond. Shortly after the fall of Saddam, the dam was renamed Mosul Dam. In 2007, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers released a report calling Mosul Dam the most dangerous dam in the world. It said that if the dam were to fail, it would fail catastrophically, sending a wave of water down the Tigris River Valley 65 feet high, and that within 2 hours it would crash into Mosul, Iraq's second largest city and home to 1.8 million people. Within 36 hours, Baghdad and its 3.8 million inhabitants would be inundated by a wave of water 15 feet high. Between the flooding, destruction of infrastructure, disease, and displacement, the Corps of Engineers estimated that 500,000 civilians would die, and warned that in the event of even a small problem, failure is likely. The grouting operations continued, but other efforts to solve the problem were stymied. Not long after the dam filled and the danger was seen more clearly, construction began on a dam at Badoush, 30 kilometers upstream from Mosul, intended to serve as a safety barrier if the Mosul Dam failed. But with the sanctions from the 1990s, construction was stopped with about 40% of the work completed, and the $10 billion price tag has kept anyone from seriously considering restarting the project. Other efforts to upgrade the grouting equipment or build better concrete plants have foundered due to a combination of neglect, corruption, and poor work quality. On August 7, 2014, amidst a series of battles between the Kurdish Peshmerga and the surging forces of the Islamic State, the Peshmerga withdrew from the area around the dam, and ISIS took control of the Mosul Dam. They held the dam for 12 tense days until a combination of U.S. airstrikes and ground attacks by Peshmerga fighters were able to drive them off, allowing the Peshmerga to recapture the dam. Worries that ISIS would blow the dam up in what would have been the largest act of terrorism the world has ever seen did not come to fruition. Had they blown the dam, Mosul would have been flattened by a giant wave of water, and every bridge over the Tigris River from the Syrian border to Baghdad would have been wiped out. However, the ISIS fighting forces in eastern Nineveh and Kirkuk would have been completely isolated and highly vulnerable to being overwhelmed by the Peshmerga. Perhaps for that reason the dam was never blown. But one has to wonder why the fleeing ISIS forces didn't blow the dam when they were forced to withdraw. Unfortunately, the workers who maintained grouting operations there were driven off in the initial assault, and ISIS stole everything of value as they retreated. For 6 weeks, no grouting operations took place, and even though work resumed, its quality was seriously degraded because ISIS still maintained control over the nearby concrete factory that supplied their materials. As a result, everything the dam workers used had to be trucked in. A January 2016 report from the Army Corps of Engineers said that the result of the interruption and degraded level of grouting means they are almost certainly an unprecedented level of untreated voids in the foundation. In recent weeks, we've heard good news and bad news. The good news is that finally, folks seem to be taking some decisive action. The Italian company Trevi won a contract to repair the dam, and Italy sent 450 troops to provide security for Trevi's workers. Their plan is to construct a cutoff wall to act as a barrier to seepage, essentially to retrofit the grout curtain that Hokjiev had included in the dam's original design. Trevi has experience with this kind of operation. The Wolf Creek Dam in Kentucky was also built on karstic rock, and they successfully built a cutoff wall that stabilized that dam. The bad news, however, is very bad. First, the cutoff wall at the Wolf Creek Dam only needed to go down 84 meters. The Mosul Dam cutoff wall will need to be 3 times that deep and twice as wide. A cutoff wall that size has never been built, and it will have to be dug right at the foot of the highly unstable dam, deep under its foundation. Nadhir Al-Ansari, an expert on the dam, along with his colleagues at Luleå University of Technology in Sweden, wrote a 2015 study that urged the government not to attempt building a cutoff wall at Mosul Dam, as all the studies carried out so far proved that such a solution is not only infeasible technologically and financially, but it could endanger the integrity of the dam itself. Second, even if the cutoff wall were feasible, and even if Trevi performs the operation flawlessly, it will still take not years, but decades to complete the work. It took 8 years to repair the Wolf Creek Dam, built in a highly developed country with no civil strife. How much longer will it take in a war zone in remote northern Iraq, with its sandstorms, austere living conditions, constant requirement for security forces, and a technological challenge unlike anything done before? The more the project is delayed, the more water will keep carving voids deep under the dam, while Lake Dohuk continues to press against it. Already the snowmelt in the Zagros Mountains is combining with spring rains to swell the reservoir. How long can the dam continue to hold? Third, at the end of January, there was a flurry of words and actions that seemed to indicate the situation was particularly dire. An Army Corps of Engineers report provided to the Iraqi parliament said, Mosul Dam is at a significantly higher risk of failure than originally understood, and is at a higher risk of failure today than it was a year ago. Lieutenant General Sean McFarland told reporters, the likelihood of the dam collapsing is something we are trying to determine right now. All we know is, when it goes, it's going to go fast, and that's bad. Meanwhile, an anonymous U.S. official told the publication, the Iraqi Oil Report, that our experts are saying the dam could go this year or next. Recently, President Obama took time to call Iraqi Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi to tell him that he was extremely concerned about the condition of the Mosul Dam. And in what was perhaps the most telling move, the Iraqi government started sending electricity to the now ISIS-controlled city of Mosul for the first time in 6 months. They did this not out of benevolence or as a part of a ceasefire agreement, but because their engineers needed to restart the turbines in order to lower the water level and relieve some of the pressure on the dam. The situation was so dire that the Iraqi government would rather provide needed assistance to their enemy rather than risk the dam collapsing. Fourth, Nadir al-Ansari's team at Luleå University re-evaluated the damage estimate from a dam collapse, and the water levels they predict are even worse. The new estimates state that within 4 hours of failure, an 80-foot wave of water would hit Mosul, rather than a 65-foot wave. 18 hours later, it would be a 50-foot high wave when it hit Tikrit, and a day later, 400 miles downriver in Baghdad, 13 feet of water would flood 50,000 acres of the capital city. Finally, and perhaps representative of the problems that plague this dam from the day of its conception through today, the specters of mistrust, politics, and corruption are preventing the necessary actions from taking place. Iraqi politicians like Aziz Ugaili said that the concern over the dam is media hype, intended to pave the way for America to return its troops to Iraq. Government officials like Mohsen al-Shamari, the Minister of Water Resources, said that the looming danger to Mosul Dam is 1 in 1,000. The Kurdish news outlet Ruda quotes workers from the dam as saying the dam hasn't moved since it was built. The threats of collapse are mere rumor, and the problems that existed since day one are simple to manage. The recent flurry of dire warnings spawned many local conspiracy theories, with some saying America wants to partition Iraq by handing the dam over to the Kurds. Others say that America wants to build up the hype so they can put out a false flood alarm that will make Mosul's residents flee the city ahead of a coalition assault. Others think it comes down to simple corruption over awarding contracts. Kurd, Sunni, and Shia all accuse each other of false motives, graft, and extortion, and conspiracy theories find a receptive audience in a nation torn apart by decades of external and internal war, sanctions, and terrorism. While the wariness and suspicion are understandable, even justified, that will do the country little good if the spring rains come just a little too hard or the erosion in the foundations are too deep and a wave of death carves a path straight through the cradle of civilization. Again, many thanks to Ethan in Cincinnati for the excellent work he did researching and writing on this subject. Mosul Dam is a strong reminder that many disasters are already in the making. Let's hope this isn't one of them. I can't say when my next episode will come out, or for that matter, what the topic of the next episode will be, but I do hope to continue with more episodes in the future. Until then, keep your ears pinned and your tail taut.